Okay, so I've been meaning to do this for a while. I've been wanting to make a video regarding single line steel, which to me is another large component of CADWorx Steel. Most people are going to be concerned with the modeling portion, and depending on how your company does things, you may only do 2D drafting based around the wireframe model, or some kind of a legacy hidden in a viewport, or 2D rep, which I haven't even done a video on that either. But you may need or want to do single line steel and want to learn how to do it. I definitely prefer using it when I can, but it can be quirky for sure. I won't be able to go over all the quirks. This video is just supposed to be kind of a primer to get you familiar with single line steel, and show you how to just get up and running with a drawing. So what I've got here is a platform that I made real quick. I've used a lot of high contrast members with a lot of different colors. It's very colorful, but they all have a specific purpose. I wanted to give each type of member a different layer, and your company may do things differently. Your company may keep all steel on one layer. I know mine does. It's kind of frustrating. They use all one color. Or your company may use different layers for everything. I would say that one thing you definitely need layer management for, you can have all your steel on the same layer except for your bracing, your horizontal bracing and your vertical bracing. And I'm going to show you why in a little bit. So what I've done, I don't have a personal title block, just a company title block, and I didn't want to use that. So I kind of simulated what you might see. I've got a border and I've got a simulated title block here, and we're just going to go ahead and create a viewport. Now I've got this as a live model here, but what you may have is an XREF. It still works the same way. The only difference is that when I make changes, I can make them directly here, but you're likely to have an XREF in your drawing that you're going to be using instead. So not a big difference. The main layers I have are a plates layer, I've got a beam layer, a column layer, vertical brace layer, horizontal brace layer, and a ladder layer. So what I'm going to do first is go into my layout and create a new viewport. So however you get to yours, mine is an alias for Lispertine, but you can just type in viewports. I can't even spell right. Viewports, and just choose single, and that'll get you there as well, or use the viewport toolbar. All right, so now I've got my viewport created. I'm going to want to pick my view. So we're going to do plan view, then we'll do some elevation views. So first thing I want to do is get inside my viewport, go to my plan view, and choose a scale. I'm going to choose 3/8. I think is a pretty appropriate scale. Actually, let's do 1/2 inch. This is a smaller platform, so I want to do something a little bit larger and easier to see, but not too big. You don't want this thing to be ridiculously large compared to your text. Now, I don't think I have any dim styles set up or any text styles set up in this, so it's going to be kind of rough around the edges for any annotation, but just kind of shore up your viewport so you're right around your platform. Just for posterity, I'll put it on a viewport layer. Okay, so we've got this thing ready to go. Now, the first thing I want to do is open up the single line steel palette. So I'm typing SLS, which is not just an alias that I've created. It's a CADWorx alias. It'll bring up your single line steel palette. It's really not that difficult because we're only going to work here in this general tab. I'm not going to work at the dimension tab. I've used the dimension tab long ago. I don't think it works very well. I mean, it works, yes, but you need a lot more control over your dimensions to make them look nice, and I think this tries to do like too much, and it comes up looking messy. So I prefer to just stick with the general tab and do my annotation separately. So what we're going to do is we are going to generate steel based on this, but I don't have a configuration set. What a configuration is really setting all of these settings ahead of time, entering the values ahead of time, and then saving that setting so you can go back to it time and time again. I'm almost positive actually I have one. I just don't have it loaded right now. But let's make one. Let's make one real quick. Let's make some settings here. So first thing, and by the way, I have to warn you before we get started because this may happen. CADWorx, especially when it comes to single line steel, and especially for older versions, because I'm using 2014 AutoCAD with 2016 plant is prone to crashing, especially when you're working with a single line editor. I would say just be careful with it. Keep an eye when you're changing these values. Save your work often. But even saying that, I still like using single line steel. So we have three sections here. We've got the line section, the tag section, and the symbol section. And I'll get to these icons in a second. When we create a single line, there's going to be a line, there's going to be a tag, and there's going to be a symbol. And if I were to generate right now, and then the generate button is right here, it just says generate viewports. So we'll start with that button. We hit generate, and then we click this viewport, and then we just hit enter. And it's going to ask us, do we want to turn the viewport off? And we'll say yeah. So it's not a really, really rough and really ugly version of single line steel, but it's got the core information there. What you can see here are the lines. This is the line section. It's what's being controlled with here. You've got the tag, which is your text, and then you've got your symbol, which is the little widget right here. This is the symbol. Now what it has done is generated everything that is in my viewport. Every member that it sees is there. And that includes members I don't want to show, which is like these L3x3 braces, vertical braces. I don't want to show them in this view. There's no reason to. I also don't need to show my ladder because I'm not detailing the ladder out. So what I would say is, what I would say is let's work on a configuration. So I'm going to hit undo to go back to where I was before, and I'm going to start putting some layers down. So let's actually create some layers. First thing I'm going to do is actually purge all of my existing layers so that what I have left are just my local layers. All right. So let's create some new layers. Actually, let's just create one new layer, right? Maybe we can call this SLS line, or just SLS, single line steel. There we go. Single line steel. And we will put this on a blue color. So now we're going to put the entire thing on the single line steel layer. So we're going to come over here and say single line steel. We're going to leave the color for this default. The line will be by layer. Same thing with the line type, the weight, all that stuff. This is, don't worry about exist. It never really even becomes a thing. I'm not even sure why it's here. I've never seen it actually used in action because it's almost impossible to make it work. Your gap style, what happens is when you generate steel, you can have gaps between the members to indicate that they're not connected. Well, they're connected, but maybe not like welded. Maybe they're bolted or something. You can have it set automatically, or you can manually set the gaps yourself. You can choose that here. And then this is the gap distance. I'll show you the control over that in a second. Next thing is your tag. So I'm going to put this on single line steel. This is going to be your text. I'm going to choose a color of cyan for the text. I'm going to leave the text height at 0.1, which is pretty close to 330 seconds, a standard text height for 24 by 36 or D size type stuff. Offset is how far the text is offset from the line or the symbol. Justification we'll leave at center. Style is whether it's going to be short or long annotation. In elevation views, you may only need to show something like W6 versus W615. This is your default annotation. We're going to put the default annotation as long. Then we're going to have the display on or off. We're going to leave the display on. This is, do you want to show the text? Do you not? You might think you always want to show the text, but a lot of times you may have plates that get caught up in your generation, and you don't want to have plates show their text. And we may not want to actually call it out, with single line steel. So you can turn the display to off. Then your symbol, again, I'm going to put this on single line steel. I'm going to have the color set to white for my main layer, and then I'm going to have it set to, sorry, I realize I have my phone sitting here next to me, and it's all going off. You're going to have, I'm going to have the color for the symbol set to white. I want the line type to be by layer, and the layer minor, I want to set to, same thing, single line steel, but I want to set the color to yellow, and I want to set the line type to, oh, I don't have a line type loaded. So I'm going to close this out, and it will save those settings. Let's open this back up. Nothing changed about them. Okay, as long as I haven't done anything else and made any other modifications, it'll save those settings. So let me load on a line type. we're just going to choose the hidden line type. Oops, not there. Here. Hidden, hit OK, hit OK. Let's see if we can get a hidden line type now. Still not loading it. You may have to, in this case, I don't want to have to reload the drawing, so I'll leave this alone for now. But I would recommend creating your line types first before you start single line steel. You may have to exit and reload back in to get the line type to show up, because it's showing what was already in the drawing, and these are the ones that are only in the drawing currently. So, but I do want to have hidden there at some point. So I'm gonna say, and I can actually, let's see if I can do that real quick. Let's just save. I've already saved this drawing, so I'm going to close it and just reopen it back up. Let's see if I can get that line type. It's not recognizing it, and this is kind of one of those glitches. I use a newer version of this stuff, and so it's not as finicky. You can even see it's not even showing the single line in the line types now. So sometimes it will work, sometimes it will not. In this case, it's not. So I'm going to leave it alone for now. Maybe we can get it to come back later. It is glitchy, but again, still prefer to do it this way. All right. Scale is how large your widget is. Length is how long it is. Offset is how offset the smaller lines are. And we'll play with all these settings in a second. So I'm going to leave all the stuff on. I got my colors set up the way I want to. I'm just going to save this setting as plan. So what I'm going to do is over here, you have save settings and open settings. I'm going to save these settings. Actually, I'm sorry, not save. I'm getting too far ahead of myself. We have to add a style first. So what we're going to do is add a named setting, and we're going to call this plan. Now it shows up here as a selectable style, as a config setting. When we've created all of our pre-made settings, if we want to make more, you can save them to a file, and that's where you put these settings at. So I'm going to go ahead and use these to generate and see what happens. All right, so we're getting there. You can see now my colors are different, obviously. So my line has the blue color. My text has the cyan that I wanted it to have. The widget has the white border with the yellow lines on the interior. So let's play with some settings now. Let's see if we can tweak this thing. And if, as you're creating a setting, it may be important for you to generate first and then adjust the settings as you go along. I don't like the offset that I'm seeing here. I think it's a bit large. So I'm going to change my offset to something like 0.04. Once you adjust a setting or a number of settings and variables here, what you can do is hit apply settings, this button right here next to generate, and you can click your viewport, and it will affect all the members at the same time. That's awesome when you want to do a global change. However, you can make changes to one member at a time. And I'll get to that in a second, but keep in mind that if you do apply settings and click one member, it'll make the changes only to that one member. Also, it treats it like a manual override. Now that you have applied the setting manually, if you go back and do a viewport application, it might adjust the settings for all the other ones, but not that one. So for example, let's say that I change the length of one of these to 0.7. Like let's say I hit apply settings and pick this one. The length of that widget got longer now, that symbol. Let's say I want all the other ones to be 0.4. Say I have a change of heart and I want everything to go back to 0.4. Well, what happens is if I set this to 0.4 and hit apply settings and hit the viewport, you're going to see this one's not going to change, but everything else will. And that's because we did a manual override. You'll also notice that now I no longer have the name of my setting in here. That's because we've deviated from that setting. If I click this and hit plan, it changes me back to my default values. Well, let's say I don't, I hit apply settings and it goes back and it changes everything back to the way it was, except for this one that had the manual override. How do I get this one to go back to the way it was? That's where you can say reset settings, and you can reset that one member and it resets it back to the default that it was when you generated. Now, if I go in here and again adjust my offset to what I wanted it to be and hit apply settings, oops, not 0.4, but 0.04, you'll see that it updates with everything else now. So if you ever have to reset a member, hit this button here will reset settings. Okay, I like this 0.4. I want to save it as part of my profile. How do I do that? How do I just hit save? Well, you essentially have to overwrite the profile that you made. So I'm going to hit add name setting, and I'm just going to type in plan again and hit OK. It's not going to warn me that I overwrote it. It's just going to do it. So plan has now been overwritten. So if I go back and forth between the default here and plan now has the 0.04. All right, that's good. So that's how you can adjust these settings after the fact. Things like text style, for example, notice how all these have a width factor of 1. I don't have my style affected right now. Let's say I come back here and I change my width factor to 0.85 and I hit apply. It's not really going to affect this stuff. I may have to actually do an apply settings again or a viewport update. There you go. Apply settings now will now fix that text after I've adjusted my text style. Your text style does affect the single line text or the single line steel text, so keep that in mind. Okay, now let's work on getting rid of some of these members I don't want to be shown. I don't want to see my vertical bracing. I don't want to see my ladder. How do I do that? Easiest way to do that is to freeze those members. Okay, I'm going to close the palette for a second here. You can freeze them globally by going into your model space and freezing them. That will freeze them for every viewport. Or you can freeze them per viewport by turning on your viewport. So I'm going to go in here, select my viewport. I'm going to turn this on. Okay. And use your preferred freezing method. My preferred freezing method, rather than going to the layer manager or finding the layer up in here, is to type in lay freeze, which I have an alias for, and then select your member, and that will freeze that member. Now, here's something to keep in mind, and I'm going to show you this right now so that you know what I'm doing. When I freeze these members, they're gone completely. However, if I freeze something like the columns, the center lines are left behind. Why is that? Well, in CADWorx, as I've shown previously in one of my other videos, when you need to change the layer of a CADWorx object, I had recommended using the S layer change. S layer change allows you to change just the solid layers. I can say yes, change the solid layer and put it on the beams layer. Say okay. And all it does is change the solid portion of this, not the center line. But if I were to select this column and go to my layer manager and just put columns, it puts the center line and the solid on the same layer because they're part of a group, so they both get put on the columns layer. This works. It's still a CADWorx object. I can still double click it and edit the member and all that stuff. It's just that it can be hard to see what the center line is when you're working with multiple members. So I always recommend leaving the center line on the center line steel layer or CL steel layer, except when you're making a structure that has bracing. And the reason for that is because you want to be able to freeze bracing. Because let me show you something over here. Let's say I have this. Let me turn this back off. Oh, we're going to turn this back to off. Okay. Now that I've made changes to my model, I'm going to use a button called Update Viewport. This basically says, hey, refresh the single line to match however the steel looks like right now. Whereas Apply Settings will adjust the way everything looks. This adjusts the steel or the single line to match the new steel configuration. So I'm going to update Viewport and select this, and you're going to see the L3s disappear. And they're gone. Now, let's say I bring those back. So I'm going to turn my viewport back on. Okay. I'm going to, I don't have a quick lay thaw for viewports. I don't have it made. So let's say it's vertical brace. All right. Let's say I bring it back. Now, I'm going to turn this back off. So now I do that viewport update again, and they're going to come back. Okay, there they are. Now, let's go to our model, and let's say I decide not to select all these. I'm going to change their centerline layer back. I'm going to change the centerline layer to CL steel. Okay, so let's say you do this number, okay? This is how you lay everything out, and you have this set up with your CL steel layer. When you go into your viewport, let's turn this back on, and you go to freeze. Double click inside of here and freeze. Looks like it's gone. So we go ahead and we say update viewport. I hit update viewport. Nothing happens. It's still there. Why is it still there? It's there because when I froze, all I did was freeze the solid, but the center lines stayed behind. And the center lines are what contain the smart information. And those center lines are what the single line steel tool is pulling from. So I have to freeze these center lines. But remember, all of my center lines are on the CL steel layer. If I freeze this layer, all the single line disappear, or all the center lines disappear, and now my single line has nothing to pull from. It will literally be a blank drawing, other than probably this horizontal brace, which has its center line on the horizontal brace layer, so it's still there, and this ladder. If I were to double click these members, nothing happens now because my center line is gone. I have taken away the intelligence by hiding the center lines. So I need that to stay the way it was. I need this for the vertical brace to have the center line match the solid. Same thing with the horizontal brace. So that way, when I'm in these views, let's see if this is turned on or off. Right now, it's on. So when I'm in these views, and I need to lock this viewport. Oh, it is locked. Okay, good. I can freeze, and then same thing with this ladder. Let's freeze the ladder. Okay. And I'm even going to freeze my plates because I really don't want to show them in this view. So I have a plate layer. I'm going to freeze those plates. All right. I'm going to say no, turn everything off. And I'm going to say SLS to open my single line palette up, hit update viewport, and the ladder, the vertical brace, and the plates are all going to disappear. Now we've got a much more clean looking single line steel drawing. Okay, now we have these gap distances I was talking about. You can see the gaps have already been created automatically. That's awesome. However, you'll notice that when I turn this viewport on, oh no, these actually already went all the way, which is fantastic. So that's kind of one of the, that's one of the benefits of using the automatic gap tool, is that it knows that this is the end of the beam and there's nothing over here, so it will make it go all the way. And that's hard to understand without seeing. It's not like I'm just talking nonsense, but let me show you what I mean by that. I'm gonna turn this off. I'm gonna set the gap to manual, and I'm gonna hit apply settings. See how this got shorter? It got shorter because now I want to control each one of these, the gaps for each one of these lines manually. I can set them all to I don't know, 0.1, and you'll see they all get bigger. Even the ones at the end. There's no reason for this to be cut back, but it's because I'm manually controlling how much this line gets cut back. Automatic recognizes that. So I'm going to set this to automatic again, and it's at 0.1, and it knows that this is the end of a beam. This beam needs to be the full length to match because there's no reason for a gap to be here. Automatic will control that. There may be times when you don't want to use automatic because it may produce unexpected behavior. For example, it thinks that we want to have these things go all the way. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. Maybe in this case, you don't want to show that gap there. So how do you do that? Well, you can set a gap of 0.1 and try to hit the end of that member, but it's being controlled with automatic. So change it to manual. Go apply settings. Now we've got a 0.1 gap for these. Now they are manually overridden. Again, if I go make any other changes and I click the viewport, those members will not change because we just did a manual override on them. Anytime you do a manual override, they're no longer affected by applying settings to an entire viewport, just those members. But that's okay, because you're going to do that a lot. You're going to tweak individual members a lot to make them look the way you want to look the way you want to look, I guess. Look at something like these C6s. They look kind of silly, right? Because their line is like right in the middle. Maybe you want to make that a little bit closer, but you don't want to affect these. So we can change this to something like a 0.3. Go ahead, apply settings, and that we can leave that gap distance set back to automatic. We got it set to 0.3 here, and I'll hit apply and apply to those two. You can click anywhere on the line, the text, or the symbol, and it will affect both members. So we're going to see this line get closer to here because we just changed the offset. I keep doing that, 0.03. There we go. So now it's a lot closer to this, looking more like a web actually would. Okay. And yes, channels and angles will identify, for the most part, should identify the orientation of the like the toe on the channel of the angle. Angles, however, even though I have this set to the center line of the angle, it kind of has its own offset distance. You'll see that this angle is not matched up exactly like it should be. The center line matches up the center line of the angle that we have shown in the background, but the widget doesn't match up exactly. That's just a CADWorx function. That's just something you have to live with, unfortunately. There's not really a way to change that. However, if you do set the work line at the back of the angle, this widget will get moved down to here. Well, I can't move it now because the editor is open. If you close the editor, you can make changes. Then I can make changes now. Keep that in mind too. As long as your editor is open, you cannot delete members. So if you have a member in here that you don't want to show and you want to erase it, you cannot use any kind of erase function until you close the editor. Then you can erase portions of it. However, once you bring the editor back and you do a regen on the viewport, the update viewport button, it brings that right back. So one of those things to keep in mind. And that's it for our plan view. I mean, there's not too much more to say about this. You've got it looking the way you want to show it. Your symbols for like your columns, maybe you want to show these as hidden. Again, my line type minor is not showing up with my hidden, not even my line type major. And it's sometimes it's you can get them to show, sometimes you can't. This one is definitely not wanting to show. Maybe I need to have a line that already has a hidden line type applied to it. What's my line type scale? Let's put my line type scale at 0.5. Okay, let's see if we have it available to us now. No, it doesn't want to recognize that there's one in there. So I'd highly recommend you have your line types created first before anything else, like with a template or something like that, because sometimes they can be difficult to get into your editor. Okay, so that's how we create our single line quickly in a nutshell. Let's go through the rest of these buttons real quick so you can kind of see what those are. So once I've got my plan saved, and let's just, you know what, let's do a quick elevation so I can show you how you have two different configurations in one settings file. So I'm going to make a new plan or a new elevation. I'm going to look at this thing from the front, and I'm going to do a quick clip on this. I'm just going to clip out one side. I'm going to clip this ladder out too. We got a clip right there. Okay. I can see my horizontal bracing caught up in this clipping plane. It will get generated because the center line is part of that. So you might as well go ahead and freeze it now because you don't want that to show up in your elevation view. Let's set this to a scale of 1/2 inch like the other one. Shore up the viewport. Okay. Put that on the viewport layer. All right. So we're starting with a default of my plan, which, by the way, I did not save as 0.4, 0.04. So, and see how it's different now. So I'm going to hit add name setting and overwrite this with plan. All right, let's make an elevation. Let's say that, oh no, do you guys see what happened? I had it on default and I overwrote plan. So how do I get this back? Well, believe it or not, there's actually a way, not with the undo tool that doesn't work in this area, but by using something like this. Whenever you select a member, a single line piece that's already been put in place, the editor will assume those settings. Really, really handy if you're trying to match settings between two things. Or if you don't want to select it, you can also do this match setting, but it's kind of the same thing. Match setting allows you to select an object to get setting, and then select my object. So I can use the settings for this anywhere else. So it's literally like match properties. You just select your original object and then apply that to other things. All right, so look at that. I've got everything I need loaded in just by selecting that one member. All I have to do now is hit the add name setting, and now we go to plan or type in plan, and there it is. My plan has been saved. Sweet, good starting point. Okay, so let's go over here to this one. It looks like I left a work line in there or something. Okay, so let's start making some settings. I don't have to tweak too much. The only real thing I want to tweak is that now that I've done long annotation in this view, I want to do short annotation in this view. So I'm going to choose short annotation, and I believe everything else will be the way I want it to be. So I'm going to save this. This is literally the only difference. Now you may have more things that you tweak. Like, for example, I know in some companies they don't use a widget or a symbol in the plan view. So let's do that. Let's make my plan view not have symbols. So I'm going to load up plan. I'm going to say the symbol is turned off. A lot of times your symbol just won't be used in plan view unless it's for channels or angles. So I'm going to save this as my plan. I'm going to hit apply settings. And that applies it to everything that has not been manually adjusted. But notice something interesting here. My columns went away. Now, this is one of those quirks that you just don't know about CADWorx that actually exists. It treats the columns as a symbol. If I want my symbols to stay like they stayed for these, I have to do a manual override. Remember, we did manual overrides on these earlier by adjusting some settings. So how can I adjust that? Well, one of the things I can do is I previously had the symbol turn on. If I select this, you'll see this gets set to on. What you can do is literally hit apply settings again on that same member with that symbol turned on. Now they've been set to a manual override. Now when I go apply settings, let me set my plan again. Symbol is turned off. Apply settings. There we go. Now I have my columns there, and I have the members that I want to show, and I want to show these with symbols because I want to show the direction that they're towing. So keep that in mind for plan view. All right, there's my plan view. No symbols. Now turn symbols on, and we say this is elevation view. So elevation. Now let's go generate. See what we can get going. Turn off the viewport. Yes. Okay. So we're looking better, but you'll notice we now have plates that are generating. They've got text. And in the case of these plates, I used a base plate tool, but it's putting the base plate into the column or into the beam. We can adjust that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set my text to off. Remember, this is what I was telling you earlier. Maybe you don't want your plates to be called out with text. So I set it to off. I'm going to hit my apply settings tool, and I'm going to click each one of these, and it turns the text off. Now, how can I fix this? Well, I can go into my model, look at this from, say, a front view. And what I like to do for this, because it happens to me pretty often where this thing comes in, what's happening is the smart line for the plate is right here on the top side of the plate. But it's treating the plate as if it were mirrored on top. So we want to mirror this so that this line comes down to here. And the way you do that is by mirroring it from the center, mirroring it about itself. And say, do you want to erase the source objects? Absolutely. Yes. Same thing here. Yes, we want to erase source objects. All right, let's go back to our layout. Now let's go back to our single line and update viewport and watch these things pop back into place. And there they are, right where they should be. All right, fantastic. So this looks good. This is, again, another good starting point. You can move things around, like text can be moved around, and as long as your editor is open, the text will maintain its location. If my editor is closed and I decide, oh, I want to move this out of the way, and then something changes in my model, so I go ahead and open up my single line palette again, and I hit update viewport, and I update my viewport by clicking on it. Oh no, my text popped back into place. And it did that because I did not move the text with the editor open. Move it back to where I wanted it, update viewport, and it stays there. So whenever you're doing any changes to single line objects, I highly recommend you do it with the palette open because it will save the changes. And so there, I've got my plan and I've got my elevation. And I really don't even need this default. You can delete it by just hitting delete, but it won't let you delete it. So I guess that's the only one you can't delete is your default. But I saved my plan. I've got my elevation. Now what I can do is, this is just saved in this one drawing. If I come back here, it'll still be here. But what happens if I want to use this in other drawings? That's where you save your settings. So we go here, and we hit save settings, and we're just going to put YCD SLS save. And that's the name of my single line steel profile. It's now that. So when I want to go to open it again later on, I hit open, and there it is, YCD SLS, they're FRT files. And that's it. Now I'm ready to go. I'm ready to rock and roll for the next platform, structure, whatever. And I can start detailing based on this. When you get to your annotation, especially your dimensioning, if your dimensions factor is set to 1, which is the dim-lfac variable, or go to your dimension styles, go to modify, go to the primary units tab, and it's this one right here. You can see at the bottom it says dim-lfac variable. If it's set to 1, you need to turn on your viewport and dimension from there. If I dimension this across here, it's only set at whatever this physical distance is of 5 inches. If I turn this viewport on and I go to dimension, now with the viewport turned on, I'm dimensioning model space, we get an accurate dimension. And of course I have my dimension settings to decimal, so I'm going to modify those real quick and change them to architectural, because that's what I'm working in. So do a dimension here, and you see we're at 10 feet. Again, I haven't set up style, so they look kind of ugly. However, this is not my preferred method. My preferred method is to change the factor and dimension everything in paper space to the single line objects. I think it's much, much faster. So type in dim-lfac, set the factor to, I'm at a 1/2 inch scale, so I'm gonna set the factor to 24. And now I can start doing my dimensions quickly just based on these objects. And I think it's much faster than having to go to model space, because you don't have to worry about zooming in real close and getting the right snapping points. It's just much faster to do it this way. So keep that kind of thing in mind. That's pretty much it. That should give you a good starting point with how to work with single line. There are definitely going to be quirks. Things may not work the way you want them to, but you know now how to adjust settings, how to apply them to the viewport globally, or how to apply them to specific objects, how to load settings into the single line palette by just clicking a member. That's really, I didn't really finish going over the rest of these buttons. We went over the important ones, but we did the match setting. We know the adding a name setting, deleting a name setting. We know you can reset a member with this. This is turning vertical symbols on and off. This doesn't work the way it normally should, which is why I ignore it most of the time, or actually all the time. This should be considered a vertical symbol, and in the past I've gotten it to work, but there's been times where I've got it just doesn't work. So I just really ignore the vertical symbols. I think it's a little too glitchy for my taste. And lastly, you've got archive drawing. This basically just removes all the intelligence of the single line and turns it to just static lines. It's great for like archiving if you're making as-builts or delivering drawings to the client who does not have single line steel. Just hit archive drawing and it just turns all the stuff into non-smart lines. It's no longer tied to your model. So, but that's it. That should get you started with working with single line. At the very least, if you're working with somebody else's single line, you know what to look for. If I can, I might make some other videos that will go over some more the nuanced, detailed stuff for specific functions. But this will get you started with making single line drawings right away.